Oh, there we go.
All right. Well, welcome to Bill Costanzo. Bill, I'm so happy you're here. Thanks for doing this.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the time.
Yeah, just by way of introduction here for our audience, Bill is a research associate at the Texas A&M AgriLife Research out of the San Angelo location, San Angelo, Texas. Um, Bill, why don't you just tell us a little bit about your background and how you became, what you're studying, and how you came to be studying that?
Okay. Well, I guess I was a high school agriculture teacher for just over 19 years. And I decided to make a move and change careers. And I saw this position. And so I applied for it back in 2018. And I came down here to Texas and did a final interview over Thanksgiving that year, and they offered me the position, and so I started in January of 2019. Um, I guess the main reason that I was interested in the position is because I had sheep and I had livestock guardian dogs, and I truly believed in the dogs, and they worked extremely well for me. I had just a small farm flock, but I never lost any lambs to predators with my dog. While my neighbors, had lots of issues, and so that's why I was interested in that, and that's how I came to do the position. Um, I had guard dogs for, I guess at that time, probably about 8 years when I took on the position. So at this point, I've got a little over 10 years experience with livestock guardian dogs.
That's great. So the position was actually offered as specifically a research position into the use of livestock guardian dogs on farms.
Yes, that's correct. So the my position is funded through the Texas Sheep and Goat Predator Management Board. It's a joint position or a joint funded position between Texas A&M AgriLife and the Sheep and Goat Predator Management Board. There's a checkoff in the majority of the counties here in the state on every sheep and goat that's sold, and so part of their funding goes to my position to do research and outreach to producers that are having issues with predation and need help with their livestock guardian dogs.
So when this program got started and when they hired you, what kind of research questions were they asking? And what were they? Did they have a base of information already that they were starting with? Had they already dialed in on the questions that they wanted answers to, or was that part of your role too, to kind of direct where that research was going to go?
Yeah, they had a livestock guardian dog program that was started at the AgriLife Center. I believe that was in 2016 or so. They were having some issues at a ranch that was donated to the program, and so they put some livestock guardian dogs on it. They had a huge increase the next year in their lamb crop, and so the director at the time started doing some more research and was interested in livestock guardian dogs and using them. And then he reached out to the Sheep and Goat Predator Management Board, and part of their mission, like I said, is funding actual research that happens with livestock guardian dogs. And so they came up with this idea to have a joint funded position, and so they hired me to further do to do research and to do extension outreach stuff with producers. And so the main project that we have going on right now was started by when I went out to producers and did producer visits, and I asked them questions that I guess they kind of wanted to know. And one of the big things, with livestock guardian dogs is the dogs roam a lot, and it's a big issue here in Texas. It's a reason why a lot of the dogs don't make it, after the first few years, because they roam and they get hit by cars or shot by neighbors or just a number of reasons. And, a little less than half of the dogs don't make it to 6 years of age, and for a variety of reasons. And so the way we decided to approach that was to look at how the dogs are bonded and how to properly bond weaned puppies to stock, and then tracking those puppies to adulthood. And so that's what we started. that was in the end of the summer of 2019. We started a multi-year bonding project, and so I take 8-week-old wean pups that we purchase or get donated from breeders here in Texas. We don't breed any dogs at all, and we put those dogs into a bonding project, and then we track them until they're 18 months of age. And as part of the bonding that we do at the center, we have bonding pens that are set up, and we put 4 to 6 head of stock into the pens with the dogs. They stay in the pens from 8 weeks old to 6 months of age. They're socialized, they're leash trained, tether trained. They get taken on truck rides. And then at 6 months of age, we release them into a pasture with livestock. The stock and the dogs all get GPS trackers put on. And then we keep them kind of depending on how it works out with a cooperating producer, but we keep them to 8 to 10 months of age, and then they go to a cooperating producer, and then we track them until they're 18 months old. And so things that we're looking for is that we're testing in the bonding project is 2 things, and these came direct from producers. One, if hot wire in the bonding pens has any effect on the dogs staying in the pastures when they're adults. And then also bonding single dogs versus a pair of dogs to stock. And, does one stay closer to livestock versus the other? And so we're in we just finished getting the second full round of dogs out. And so I'm in the process right now of trying to analyze all the data from the first set of dogs and then keeping an eye on how the second set of dogs are doing with the cooperating producer. And some of them are also on our research ranches that we have too.
So I'm dying to know what preliminary results you have and what direction that seems to be going, the answers to those questions. But before I get there, just a couple of thoughts. So I think probably I'm not alone in thinking that the way a livestock guardian dog tends to wander, maybe I am alone in this, but I always assumed that was just an inherent trait in most of those dogs, that's their job. They're bred for hundreds, if not thousands of years to wander a perimeter and seek out any predators or problems that are out there. But this project is actually suggesting that it might be a bonding problem, or that more enhanced bonding with the livestock could prevent that wandering. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. So the dogs are used differently over in Europe than they are here in Texas, and even how they're used in the mountain states. In Europe and in the mountain states, they use herders, and so very few operations here in Texas use herders, and so the dogs are just put out in pastures, and they're on their own most of the time. I mean, they do get checked on regularly by the producers, but there isn't a person with them 24 hours a day. And so we do have a big issue with the dogs roaming. And so, like I said, how we decided to look at that, or hopefully be able to possibly change that issue, is making sure that they're bonded correctly to livestock. In our experience, we've gotten a lot of dogs from breeders, and they were supposed to already be bonded, and maybe they were, but they didn't bond well to our stock once we got them. And so dogs that we've raised and bonded have been much more successful for us long term than dogs that we purchased as a bonded puppy that was, say, 8 to 10 months of age.
And do you ascribe that to the fact that perhaps that puppy wasn't as well bonded to livestock as the people who gave you the puppy thought they were? Or is it that the livestock changed? So moving from this herder flock to another herder flock, the dog just wasn't able to rebond, so to speak, or adapt to that new population?
Yeah, I'm sure, we work with a lot of breeders on a regular basis, and I'm sure the ones that we've gotten dogs from, they probably were bonded to their specific stock. But a lot of times we're moving dogs between pastures and between ranch locations. And so they may have originally been bonded with just sheep, but then we need them to guard goats, for instance. And so they don't have that bond. And so when we bond the dogs, as in this project that we're doing right now, there's at least a wool sheep, a hair sheep, a meat goat, and an Angora goat, at least one in each pen. Because we don't know, where the dogs will end up, whether they end up at one of our research ranches or what kind of livestock the cooperating producer has. So we're bonding them to multiple species at once, so that hopefully, there's less a chance of them roaming later on.
Okay. And what I know that this is an ongoing project, and I'd love to have you back in the future and kind of just check in with you
Oh,
as
yeah,
your
for sure.
research develops and see what new insights you've been able to get from the program. But just generally, are you optimistic that a guardian dog that came from a different location with different stock that is, say, 1 or 2 years old can be rebonded to other animals as successfully as a puppy that grows up in one location around the same flock its entire life? Or is that
Uh,
unlikely to ever happen?
I think they can be, but I don't think the bond is as strong. And so, as long as they're raised, with livestock, and they go through that critical bonding phase of, up to about 16 weeks of age. Some people say 14. It just kind of depends. As long as they're in contact with livestock at that point, for several weeks there, they'll probably have that bond forever. Will they have a preference? Yes. It seems like most of the dogs, depending on what they're bonded to, they have a preference of what livestock they want to be with. This is extremely preliminary with what we're doing so far, but it appears that the dogs that are bonded in hot wire pens roam less so far. It also appears that single bonded dogs have a stronger bond to the livestock. But when they're all released into a larger pasture together, the single bonded dogs tend to stay with the livestock while the pair moves off and deals with whatever they perceive as a threat. So we've seen both of those things in the first 2 rounds of the bonding project. But again, that's very preliminary at this point. So that's not to say that either one of those is a hard and true fact at this point in time.
Okay. What's the protocol, just very generally, as far as what do you do when you get a pup? You already mentioned that you put one of each style or type or species of livestock in the pen with them, but how big are the pens? How old are they when they go in? How long do they stay in there? And then what sorts of things are you looking for to know that that pup is reaching an adequate level of bonding with those animals?
Okay. So again, we get pups that are 8 weeks old. We have 4 total pens, and there's 2 pens in a 100-acre pasture. There's a separate 100-acre pasture, and then there's 2 more pens in a 100-acre pasture again. And each of those pens is separated by about a quarter of a mile. So there's very little chance for the dogs to ever see each other or hear each other until they're released. So I take 8-week-old pups. They go into a 60 by 60 enclosure with 4 to 6 head of stock, just kind of depending on what we can get rounded up at the time. They're generally, age on the livestock. They're usually younger, like nanny kids or ewe lambs. But sometimes I get older ewes or older nannies. Like I said, it's whatever kind of we have available at the time.
Are you controlling for whether the stock has previous experience with livestock guardian dogs or not necessarily?
All of our stock has experience with livestock guardian dogs already, because all of our animals are at this point are guarded by livestock guardian dogs. Some might be just 1 dog, some might be 2 or 3 dogs. It just depends on the location. But yeah, everything that we have has experience already. So the puppies stay, so inside that, let me go backtrack a little bit. So inside that 60 by 60 enclosure, they either have hot wire inside there or no hot wire. And then it'll be a single pup or a pair of pups. And Oh, they spend a month in that small enclosure to make sure that they're bonded. And so what I'm looking for at that time in that first month, um, I'm looking for, when I come up to the pens, a lot of times I'll stop the truck, a ways from the pen, and I'll just kind of sneak up to see the dogs. And so if they're laying with the livestock, if they're moving with the livestock as the livestock move around the pen, if they're licking the faces, if they're being submissive to the livestock, those are all the things that I'm looking for to see if those dogs are bonded to the stock. And so once that first month is up, generally the puppies are they're showing signs of being bonded to the stock at that point. Then they get released into a 1 acre pen. And the pens basically just have wire mesh around them. There's one strand of barbed wire at the bottom and 2 strands at the top. And then, like I said, some of the pens have hot wire on them, some of them don't. And so then they stay in that 1 acre enclosure until they're 6 months old.
Okay.
And again, all during that time, I'm looking for, are they moving with the stock throughout the pasture? When I show up, are they at the gate or are they out with stock? Whether the stock is eating or laying or whatever. I'm always looking for those things that the dogs are showing a bond to the livestock. At the end of 6 months, they get released from those 1 acre pens, and then depending on whether they're in the hot wire pasture or the non-hot wire pasture, all 3 of those dogs get released together into a larger pasture. And so they get GPS trackers put on them, and there's GPS trackers put on the livestock. And so they stay there until they're 8 to 10 months of age, kind of depending on how it works out for the cooperating producer. And also too, I guess kind of what I'm seeing with the dogs, are they, once they're released into a very large pasture, I say very large, but it's about 100 acres. Are they staying with the stock, or are they always hanging out at the pens? Some of the dogs mature faster or slower, and some of them, want to be more playful or less playful. So that affects the time before we release them to a producer also. So generally by 10 months of age, they're ready to go. We have a producer generally bring livestock to us. I do a quick rebond. And so whatever the stock are that the producer has, the dogs and the stock go back into the bonding pen. I keep them in there anywhere from 7 to 14 days, depending on how I see that they're rebonding to that specific group of livestock. And then the producer picks them up, and they get released onto their ranches. And we track the dogs again. We don't track the stock after that. We're just tracking the dogs after that until they get to be 18 months of age. Main thing that we're looking for after they leave us is that they're not roaming, that they're staying in the pastures that they're supposed to be in at the producer's ranch.
Okay. And then during this initial bonding time, well, through the whole stretch that you have those dogs with you, then are you feeding them with self feeders so that they don't become, associate you with the food? And
Yes, yeah, we use feeding stations on all of our dogs. We don't hand feed any of the dogs. We do supplemental feed the dogs that are like out at our ranches, and I recommend producers do supplemental feed their dogs just to keep them socialized, whether it's with biscuits or pepperoni treats or an old sandwich that you've got or canned wet food or whatever. But yeah, we use self feeders. We use a feeding station, and I try to get producers to use a similar type of feeding station that we have in the bonding pens at their location, so that the dogs are just kind of used to going into that same type of a setup.
Okay. And you mentioned the supplemental feeding. That reminds me that I think you have a video in that regard on your YouTube channel, which I also want to plug here. It's if you just search for Livestock Guardian Dog Texas A&M, it'll come up pretty easy. And there's a bunch of good information there. On that issue of supplemental feeding, are you careful to make sure that you're doing that in the presence of the stock, though? Like you don't.
Yes, thank you for mentioning that. Yeah, that's very critical. Anytime that even normal feeding, a lot of smaller producers hand feed their dogs, and if you can hand feed your dog, that's great. It's very difficult for most producers here in Texas to hand feed their dogs. We have extremely large ranches, and I routinely deal with ranches that are 30 to 50,000 acres. And so it's very difficult when you've got 30 to 40 dogs to hand feed all of them. So they have to use self feeders. But for smaller producers, it's really important that you don't give any type of positive reward to the dogs if they're not with livestock, if they're not wherever you want them to be all the time. So if they show up at your back porch, unless that's where you want to feed them, you shouldn't encourage that kind of behavior. So any supplemental feeding that we do, or treats or training bait or whatever you want to call it, that really should happen in an area with livestock where you want the dogs to be all the time.
That helps. Let's get a sense of scale here for me and for the audience. You mentioned some of these ranches are really large. So what would we consider on those really big ranches to be wandering versus just patrolling, just doing their job? Or how close would your producers there in Texas like to see those guardian dogs stick to the flock?
Well, I mean, most of the producers, when they have multiple dogs like that, they like at least one of the dogs that's with the herd to stay with the herd at all times. Generally, what we see is the dogs have basically 3 different kind of guarding styles, I guess. And I don't see anything specific with a certain breed or anything like that. But basically, you'll get one kind of dog that stays with the herd all the time. They never leave the herd. A second kind of dog will check in on the herd, but it'll patrol the perimeter, so the fence line all the time. And then you get a third type of dog that kind of floats back and forth. It'll be with the herd sometimes, it'll be out patrolling perimeter sometimes, and kind of go back and forth. And so ideally, a producer wants, in one pasture, for instance, they want, one of each of those style of dogs. And that's kind of the ideal. Now, how far does a dog roam? Well, even on 50,000 acres, we do have pastures, that are set up on those ranches. And so they could be anywhere from a section to 2 sections, or maybe even 3 sections. So that's about 1,800 acres. They generally want the dogs to stay, in that pasture, to be with that group of livestock, because most producers, we try to encourage them to, if you're using livestock guardian dogs, the more that you can condense your livestock, the easier it is for the dogs to guard them. So, especially during like critical times of like lambing or kidding, if you can put all your livestock into one group, it makes it much much easier for the dogs to be able to do their job and protect the livestock during that time.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned the pasture subdivisions inside of a ranch, and presumably they're divided off by fencing, because you mentioned that they don't typically herd or shepherd
yes, sir.
their herds. Is there any hope that a dog can be conditioned or trained to acknowledge fences? My experience with livestock guardian dogs is they can pretty much get out of anything they want, but is there any acknowledgement of fences that's possible, perhaps with using bright white poly wire as the hot wire when you condition the pups, and then using that around perimeters of fences just as a visual cue to stop? Is there, or am I being too idealistic?
On ranches that size, it's usually not realistic to try to do something like that. That's why we're trying to bond dogs with hot wire and without, to try to see if that's making a difference. Like I said, so far in the first set of pups that we had that were bonded in hot wire pens, when they left the AgriLife Center, they went to a cooperating producer's ranch. He had a very small place by Texas standards. It was only 2,000 acres, and most of his pastures were 400 to 500 acres. In the 10 months that we were tracking those dogs that were bonded with hot wire, they never left the pasture that the producer had them in, not a single time. So, I guess to answer your question, can they be conditioned to not leave? Yes, we believe that they can. Now, again, that's only one set of dogs. We're just starting the second set now with producers. Um, but, it seems like, yeah, you can
Okay.
train them during the bonding phase to make sure they stay in a pasture.
But that's more a function of their bondedness to the herd than it is any visual recognition of a boundary. So,
Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
All right. So you mentioned breed just in passing there, and I think that's a fascinating topic because you said that you're really not noticing any distinction from breed to breed. There are distinctions from individual to individual, but not breed to breed with regard to how easily how thoroughly they're bonded to their herds or how far they travel. Um, I think that's something that folks will find really interesting because we talk about these different breeds like that's a patrolling dog, that's a perimeter dog, that's a stick with the herd dog, or we've had one guest talk about sticky dogs versus dogs that are less sticky, but you're not seeing that so much.
So most of the dogs that we deal with, I guess we kind of refer to them as a Texas mix. And so and the percentage changes depending on the breeder we get them from, but they're a mix of Pyrenees, Akbash, and Anatolian Shepherd. And sometimes, Pyrenees might be substituted with Maremma.
Okay.
So we're generally not dealing with straight bred dogs most of the time. Now, are there some, I'm sure somebody that breeds Pyrenees, for instance, would argue with me, on that, or with Akbash. There are generalities with certain breeds. In general, Pyrenees are more forgiving of other dogs coming into their territory, and Akbash are not as forgiving. And Commodores are definitely don't like other dogs in their area. We have a Akbash Commodore cross dog, and if she sees a herding dog just driving by her pasture in the back of one of our trucks, I mean, she will chase us down and follow us until she, we get past her area.
Wow.
But, we don't see, specific things, I guess, with most of the breeds. We see differences between individual dogs rather than breeds.
Okay, fascinating. Um, and of course that's appropriate because most of the people you serve there in Texas are using that style of dog, so it's not particularly useful for you yet to take purebreds of several different breeds and compare them side by side
Yeah.
necessarily. Yeah. Okay. What's would that be the case on your farm too before you started this job that the same type of dogs, same mixes of breeds?
Yeah, I mean, my personal dogs. I had two of my dogs were Akbash Pyrenees crosses. One of them was probably one of the best dogs I've ever owned in my life. Never roamed. Was great with stock. Even chased flying predators, which I get people ask me about that all the time. No, I have not figured out a way to train dogs against flying predators. The second dog I had, she was one of the worst dogs you probably could ever have. She constantly roamed, never stayed home, didn't do a good job guarding stock. My third dog I had, he was a three-way cross. He was a little bit of Maremma, a little Pyrenees, and a little Akbash. It's just what I was able to get, at the time that I needed a dog. And, he did very well. And so
If we're talking true working ranches where their livelihoods depend on the effectiveness of their livestock guardian dogs, at least to some degree, what do you suppose is the typical washout rate of livestock guardian dogs, either ones that just don't cut the mustard or they wander and they get hit by cars or whatever? Like what percentage do you think pan out for a good 6-7 years?
For most of the producers that I've visited with, it's about 70% make it. So you have about a 30% washout rate. Now, based on a survey that we had done with producers, I think that was before I started. I think that was about 2017 or 2018, that number was about 48% didn't make it. So, somewhere between that 30 and, probably 45% washes out, probably realistically.
Okay. So if the goal, just hypothetically, if the goal was to take that 30% washout rate and reduce it down to 20 or 15%, what would have to happen? Is it better breeding? Is it more research and knowledge to apply? Is it better conditioning and training? What order would you put those impacts, those influences on?
I would say, the first thing I guess is, kind of what we're studying right now is better bonding of the dogs from the get-go. Okay. And making sure that, they're purchased from actual working parents, and that they're, exposed to different types of livestock, because things change over time. And that's what I try to encourage producers is that, okay, just because you have sheep right now, especially here in Texas, doesn't mean at some point you may not get cattle or you may not get goats. So in that critical bonding time of the pups, make sure that you expose them to as many different things as possible at that point. Because the dog's hopefully going to live to be 8 to 10 years of age. And in that time, things at your operation can change. And if you don't, expose the dog to that early on, it's going to make it more difficult for you later on. If you have to if you're changing from sheep to goats, you may not be able to keep that dog. You may have to sell the dog with the sheep and start all over again. And it's a very costly process. Based on our numbers, after your first 2 years, you're looking at probably a little over $2,000 that you've invested into a dog. Now, are they worth it? I would definitely say yes. It doesn't take a whole lot of lambs or kids that you increase and keep alive to pay for that livestock guardian dog. So hopefully that kind of answers your question there.
Yeah, no, it does. Okay. You talked about how big the ranches are in Texas, but is Texas experiencing, at least at some scale, what other traditionally agricultural areas of the country are, which is the size of farms? Well, on average, farms are probably getting bigger because the ownership is consolidating, but we're also getting more and more small farms that may not even be commercial farms. They're rural estates, they're ranchettes, they're hobby farms. And is that driving up interest in livestock guardian dogs?
Yes, it is. I get questions all the time from new producers because they decided to move, out of Dallas or out of Houston, and they bought some property and they want to have some livestock because, their grandparents had something and now they want to do it. And so generally those are smaller places, anywhere from 5 to 50, maybe 100 acres. And, they generally will have 1 or 2 livestock guardian dogs. And so, there is an increase there. A big issue here in Texas is a lot of the ranches they might be staying the size that they are, but they're getting out of agricultural production itself, completely. And they're becoming, hunting ranches, for instance. And that's a big business here in Texas for all the producers, the ones that have livestock and the ones that don't. And so when they get out of, sheep or goat production, for instance, and your neighbor still has sheep and goats, then the predators, are drawn towards the sheep or goats. And so it makes it more difficult for those producers to stay in business. And so more of those producers are, even the large producers are getting into using livestock guardian dogs.
And what kind of predators are we talking about in Texas?
We have quite a few. The main one is just like anybody else, coyotes. They're a big threat, and the dogs work very well against them. Feral hogs are a huge issue across the state. producers routinely fly helicopters and they'll shoot 50 to 100 plus hogs on a ranch, and they'll do that, a couple times a year. Bobcats are an issue. We do have, depending on the area, some producers have a large threat, especially goat producers, from eagles, black-headed buzzards, and then a bird that's come up over the last 15 or 20 years from Mexico. It's called a cara. It's kind of like a raptor. And those are very aggressive. They'll actually, if a lamb or if a ewe is lambing or a goat's kidding, or even if a cow is calving, they'll actually go after the calf or the newborn before it's even all the way out of the mother. They generally will peck out like the eyes and the tongue, and then you get secondary infections, and then the animals die. So yeah, we have a variety of predators here.
Yes, you do. It had not occurred to me that feral hogs would be a predator of lambs and kids.
Oh yeah, I mean, they just, and you wonder, like, okay, so you go through lambing or kidding, for instance, you're expecting 120% lamb crop. You see all these lambs or kids born, and then all of a sudden at weeding, you're down to 60%, and you're like, what happened to all of them? Well, you had feral hogs, because the hogs come in and they just take everything. It's not like a bobcat or a coyote where you'll see a carcass at some point. The hog just eats all of it, and it's just gone. And so, yeah, feral hogs are a huge issue here. And, it kind of depends on the dogs. Most of the dogs, as long as they're not threatening their livestock, they pretty much leave the hogs alone. Now, some dogs will go after and chase the hogs and keep them out of pastures, but generally, as long as they're not a threat, then they kind of leave them alone.
Okay. So let's just pause here for a second, because we have something to check off our list. We kind of have this ritual that we do on the podcast where we ask our guests if they have a favorite farm dog or a favorite farm dog story. And this need not be livestock guardian dogs. It can be some dogs way from your childhood or whatever you like. So do you have a favorite dog or a favorite story you'd like to tell?
I'm kind of a livestock guardian dog. I've had a lot of different types of dogs growing up. We did a lot of bird hunting. And so, as far as like a hunting dog, I'd have to go for like a Weimaraner. They're a good guard dog for the family. I had excellent success with several Weimaraners as pheasant hunting dogs. I like to upland game hunt whenever I can. And, I guess, I don't know that I have a specific story. Actually, I guess I do. Now that you mentioned that, I'm thinking back to being young and in high school and going out and hunting with my dog after school on the ranch. So we were out hunting one afternoon, and we had gotten a couple pheasants, and we were sitting there cleaning the birds. And so we had a couple dogs. And so my dog was a little younger. She was about a year old, I think. And maybe about 10 feet from us, like I said, my dad and I were talking, we were cleaning the birds and everything. And all of a sudden she goes on point. And, I kind of look over at her and I just ignore her, and my dad and I keep talking, and, 5 minutes goes by and she's still like frozen there, And my dad's like, that dumb dog, I can't believe she's pointing, there's nothing in that bush that's, like I said, it was maybe 10 feet away. It might have even been closer. So we were done. We were needing to head back to the house. And so I'm like, okay, man, this dog's just still frozen. So I go over there and kick the bush. Sure enough, big rooster flushes right out. I didn't have my gun ready, neither my dad or anything. She held that point the whole time we were sitting there talking and cleaning birds. So I guess that's one of my, favorite stories. I had kind of forgotten about that till you just asked that question.
Always trust the dog, Bill.
Yeah.
Always trust the dog.
I know.
Yeah. Well,
so
I'm glad
they know what they're doing.
Yeah. I'm glad you told that story about a bird dog, because one of the things I think that's really cool about dogs in rural life is that, there's all these categories, but there's also a lot of crossover. And a lot of us, our best experiences out in the rural parts of this country are with farm dogs that have a purpose that maybe is not herding or is not livestock guardian role. But I just did a podcast with a gentleman who is going to talk more about the overlap of farm dogs, and even in the history and the genetics of the common genetics of farm dogs and hunting dogs. So Craig Koshik will be on an episode coming up soon. So that is a good preview. Thank you, Bill.
Yeah.
Bill, if you could, you mentioned that most of the dogs you're dealing with there are that Texas mix of livestock guardian breeds. If there was a breed you could import from another part of the country or another part of the world that you think could improve the stock we have available here in North America, or specifically Texas, what would it be?
Wow, I don't know. There's a lot of different guardian dog breeds that are out there. I guess, just something for me that makes it easier for me. And I don't know that this really answers your question, I guess, but the majority of livestock guardian dog breeds are white. Okay. And so besides the research and stuff like that I do, I also, am involved in the care and the handling of the dogs that we have at the center itself that we use. And so if there was any way, to, give them like some spots or some distinctive color markings, it would be really helpful, because when one of the guys comes in and tells me, well, hey, this white dog was limping, I've got probably 15 white dogs. And so which white dog was it? So maybe something like a Pyrenees Mastiff, where they have some, spots to them. Is always helpful. And that's one of the nice things about, a lot of the Texas mixed dogs, I guess I'll say, is with the Anatolian mix in there, a lot of times you'll get, some odd colorings to the dogs. And so it does make it a lot easier when, one of the guys comes in and says, well, hey, this dog got stuck with a bunch of porcupine quills, or, has got a bunch of cactus thorns in his foot, or whatever it is. And then I instantly know, well, it was the one that had some gray on its face, or it had a black ear, or, mm-hmm. the white dog with the solid black face, or something like that. So I don't know, I guess maybe my personal preference, and it's mainly just because it's here in Texas, any of the shorter haired breeds, the Anatolians or the Akbash, I personally really like the Akbash. I think they're a very good livestock guardian dog. They have that shorter hair for here. They don't like other dogs in their area as much as some of the other breeds. They seem like they don't roam as much, the dogs that have that more of the Akbash mix to them. But
yeah, that's helpful. And while we're on that topic, with regard to the coat, so many of the livestock guardian dogs actually do have this big fluffy coat, and you do some kind of health management and physical care videos on your YouTube channel there, and in your blog, which I should mention, by the way, it's called The Guardian Way. Thank you. Yep. And you can find that just by searching for Bill Costanzo, Texas A&M AgriLife. You'll find The Guardian Way. Some really great articles there, and some of them having to do with the care of coat and just the physical needs of these dogs. I have a friend who comes over to my place, and he'll walk over and pet my Maremma, and he will say, gosh, that dog looks hot. You should shave that dog's coat. Is that a good idea? You're in Texas where it's really hot sometimes. Is it a good idea to shave the coat of a guardian dog?
Generally, I would say no. Now, one of the issues that we have on the larger ranches is it's different for smaller producers, and a lot of smaller producers don't understand this. When you have 30 or 40 dogs, you don't have time to go out and groom these dogs. You just don't. And we have a lot of brush and a lot of different types of grasses that have seeds and stuff like that. And all these things get caught in these longer haired dogs in their coats. And so generally what we do is, on the longer haired dogs, we have to do some trimming. Now, when I say trimming, I'm not talking about taking them right down to the skin. It's not like you're shaving them, okay? And we do not shave their heads. We do not shave their backs or their upper sides or their back legs or anything like that. We do shave the bottom of their tails a lot of times, their inner legs through their belly, up through their chest. We recently had a dog. We have this grass called spear grass, and it's the seed head on spear grass is extremely sharp. I mean, it's like a needle, and it has a little hook on it, and it gets caught in the coat, and it works its way into the skin and creates an infection in every location. And so you really have to watch out for that in the spring. And so we had a dog that, she's in a location with a lot of brush and stuff like that. We have a lot of spear grass on that ranch. And she developed a very severe infection in her rear leg. And she ended up having to be kenneled, and she lost a lot of weight because she couldn't get into the feeding stations. And, luckily we caught it in time. But it's really important that you give your dogs some coat care, that you don't shear them completely down to bare skin ever. You need to leave a little bit of hair even on the body, under their body and their belly area, inner legs and stuff. But in those areas that develop a lot of burrs and mats, you do have to go through and clip those out. A lot of our dogs are not well socialized. And so it's difficult to catch them. And so when you can catch them, you have to take care of those kind of things. And again, smaller producers don't really understand the difference and the issues that larger producers have with their livestock guardian dogs. They want to keep their dogs in top shape, just like the small producer does, but they're not able to manage them the same way.
Great, that's helpful. Just on the way out the door here, I got a couple more questions for you that you can answer all at once. You've got a lot of dogs in front of you, and even though your research is far from done, you've had far more experience than the rest of us in observing these dogs. What's the biggest surprise, either from the research directly or from just observing all these dogs? And then also, what would you like to study? What would you like answers to in the future that maybe you don't have an official program for right now?
I guess some of I guess I'll start with the last portion. Some of the biggest questions I'd love to be able to study is, do things like roaming and, how well a dog is socialized. Are there like genetic DNA traits that, those dogs have? So dogs that roam all the time, do they have a DNA marker that, is different from a dog that stays close and, has a strong bond? So are there, can you take genetics into that? And that's a huge, costly type of study that would take many years and many dogs. So that's a big question that we have. And we talk about that a lot at the center. Something I think maybe a little, we might be able to solve, maybe a little easier is, and I guess this is kind of something that I get surprised about sometimes, is the amount of time that it takes socializing the dogs, as they're pups, how that relates to them when they're an adult. So it's really surprising the small amount of change that you make socializing the dogs as a pup, how well if they're overly socialized or under socialized as an adult. The first set of pups that we had were definitely probably overly socialized. I went out 4 to 5 times a week, saw the dogs. I spent maybe 5 minutes per dog per day with direct socialization, and that was, rubbing them, feeling their feet, playing with their toes, checking their mouth, their ears, brushing them, that kind of thing. Second set of dogs, I changed that because the first set were a little overly socialized. We went down to 3 days a week, and we still did the same type of things, but just 3 days a week. It seems like even at 3 days a week going out, 5 minutes direct socialization, still the dogs ended up a little too socialized for what we're looking for. We want to be able to go out in the field and catch your livestock guardian dog. And I think everybody should be able to. You should be able to go out and catch your dog. But on the other hand, once you see your dog, if you're just going out to check stock and see how your dog's doing, your dog shouldn't end up following you, as you leave the ranch and go back to the headquarters. They need to stay with the livestock. And so I think the next round of the bonding project that we do, I'm going to look at maybe just 5 or 10 minutes a week of direct socialization time. I'll still do some of the other training that we do with tether training and leash training and giving the dogs truck rides and stuff like that as puppies. But I'm going to do less direct socialization because the dogs have ended up, where they're following the guys as they're feeding, and then they end up roaming because they follow them physically down the road. And they end up at the neighbors or something like that. And then we get a call that, one of our guardian dog puppies is at the neighbor's house. So just like every other producer, we have issues with our dogs, just like you do. So, I do want to make that known. What we're doing is not perfect. And we're studying those things, and we keep track of the dogs, even as adults, dogs that have gone through the bonding project. I'm still keeping track if those dogs are roaming as adults or not roaming, and how they're doing, to make changes in those things that we do as puppies with them. At some point, we hope to have that ideal amount of socialization versus, being able to catch them still as adults and having a strong bond with stock as an adult. So.
That really is a fascinating topic. And in fact, I'd love to do a whole podcast episode on that issue of, how do you walk that fine line between the right amount of socialization and detracting from the bond that the dog should have with the animals. And so, boy, I hope you get some time to study that and some funds to study that.
Yeah, I'm definitely hoping to.
Well, Bill, this has been immensely helpful. Thank you so much. I'm excited about what you're doing and that you're getting this kind of information out there to folks. My audience will find it extremely valuable, and I'm sure that the folks in Texas do too. So thank you so much. And I'd like to check in with you down the road, if that's okay.
Yeah, that'd be great. I really appreciate you taking the time and allowing me to be on the show today. And I'm always available to help producers, whether they're in Texas or not. I get calls from people all the time. So if you have questions about livestock guardian dogs, feel free to reach out to me. I'm more than happy to help you.
And what's the best way for them to find you, Bill?
The best way is either to message me through our Facebook page, which is just TAMU Livestock Guard Dog, or they can email me at the AgriLife Center, and my email is bill.costanzo, that's COSTANZO, at ag.tamu.edu.
Great. We'll put some of this stuff, a bunch of the websites and YouTube channel and the blog and that sort of thing. We'll get that in the notes for the show as well. So
thank you.
All right. Hey, thanks so much, Bill. Have a great evening. Okay.
You too. Thank you very much. I appreciate it, sir.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.